My daughter-in-law stood in the middle of the living room, pointed at the front door and said, "You're nothing but a leech." For a second, I honestly thought I'd misheard her. A leech. The word echoed through the house I'd spent nearly 15 years paying for. Before I could respond, my son looked down at the hardwood floor instead of looking at me. "Dad," he said quietly, "my wife and her parents come first now. If you can't accept that, maybe it's time you left." Nobody spoke after that. The television hummed in the background. A dishwasher ran somewhere in the kitchen. Outside, a lawnmower buzzed across the neighbor's yard like it was any ordinary Saturday afternoon. Inside, my world had just split in half. I slowly turned my head and looked around the room. The stone fireplace I built it with my own hands after retiring from 38 years as an HVAC technician. The oak shelves I spent 2 weekends cutting, staining, and installing every board. The hardwood floor beneath my son's feet I'd paid every penny. Every mortgage payment, every property tax bill, every insurance premium, every major repair. Yet somehow, I was the leech. I picked up the overnight bag I'd packed after hearing the argument growing louder upstairs. "I understand," I said. No yelling, no insults, no dramatic speech, just 3 simple words. Then I walked out the front door. My name is Richard Collins. I'm 68 years old, a widower, and until that afternoon I believed there wasn't much a parent couldn't forgive. I grew up believing that family wasn't measured by money. My own father worked in an auto plant outside Dayton, Ohio. My mother cleaned motel rooms for years. We never had much, but we always knew where we belonged. That's how I raised my son Ethan. Or at least I thought I had. After my wife Linda passed away from breast cancer 7 years earlier, the house became painfully quiet. Ethan visited often back then. He'd sit with me on the back porch, drink coffee, and ask me about work stories I'd already told 100 times. Those afternoons kept both of us going. Then he met Amanda. At first, I genuinely liked her. She was energetic, ambitious, and seemed to make Ethan happier than I'd seen him in years. When they got engaged, they dreamed of buying a home in one of Columbus's nicer suburbs. Unfortunately, dreams don't impress mortgage lenders. Student loans, car payments, credit card debt from planning the wedding. Their income wasn't enough for the kind of house they wanted. One evening, Ethan came over looking embarrassed. "Dad, I hate asking." I stopped him before he could finish. "How much?" He laughed nervously. "I knew you'd ask that." Over the next several weeks, I met with the bank alongside them. I paid the down payment. I covered the closing costs. When the lender suggested leaving the title in my name until their finances stabilized, everyone agreed it made sense. "It'll only be temporary," Amanda had said with a smile. "Thank you so much." I believed her. After closing day, I quietly set up automatic payments from my retirement account. Every month, without fail. I never reminded them. Never kept score. I considered it helping my family. Linda would have done the same. The first couple of years were wonderful. Sunday dinners, barbecues, football games, Christmas mornings filled with laughter. Amanda baked pies. Ethan grilled burgers. I felt like we'd built something together. Then Amanda's parents retired and moved closer. At first, they only visited occasionally. Soon they stayed weekends. Then entire weeks. Eventually, they seemed to have their own drawers in the guest room. Her father, Gary, had an opinion about everything. "You ought to repaint this room. The landscaping feels outdated." I'd knock out that wall. Funny thing was, he always said "your house" when speaking to Ethan. Never once to me. Amanda's mother, Sheila, wasn't rude outright. She simply acted as though I were invisible. If I spoke, she'd continue her conversation. If I cooked dinner, she'd order takeout. If I mentioned Linda, she'd quickly change the subject. Little cuts. Small enough to ignore, deep enough to leave scars. The first real warning came one afternoon when I walked into the living room carrying a framed photograph. It showed Linda standing beside the maple tree we'd planted on our 20th anniversary. Amanda glanced up. "Oh," she sounded almost disappointed. "I packed those family photos away." I frowned. "What photos?" "The older ones." She smiled politely. "I wanted the house to feel cleaner." Cleaner. I walked into the hallway closet. There they were. Boxes. Every photograph of Linda. Our wedding picture. Vacation albums. Family portraits. All stacked beside old Christmas decorations. I carefully carried one box back to my car without saying a word. That night I cried harder than I had at Linda's funeral. Not because the pictures had been moved. Because someone had decided her memory no longer belonged in the home she'd helped build. Things only got worse. Amanda started introducing me to neighbors as Ethan's dad. Not Richard. Not the homeowner. Just Ethan's dad. Whenever friends visited, Gary proudly gave house tours. This kitchen renovation turned out great. As if he'd paid for it. As if he'd lifted a single hammer. One evening, I overheard Amanda talking with one of her friends in the backyard. "We really need Richard to start giving us more privacy." Her friend asked, "Doesn't he live here?" Amanda laughed. "Sort of. Sort of. I went home that night and stared at my bank statements. Mortgage payment. Automatically withdrawn. Property tax. Automatically withdrawn. Insurance. Automatically withdrawn. Month after month. Year after year. I almost canceled them that evening. Instead, I convinced myself things would improve. Families go through rough seasons. People say things they don't mean. Surely Ethan would notice. Surely he'd remember who had always stood beside him. But Ethan was changing too. Not overnight. Slowly. Like a shoreline disappearing one wave at a time. If Amanda wanted Thanksgiving with her parents, that's what happened. If Gary criticized me, Ethan stayed silent. If Sheila interrupted me, Ethan looked at his phone. Every silence felt louder than any argument. I kept telling myself he was trying to keep peace inside his marriage. Maybe he was. But peace bought with someone else's dignity is never really peace. The final argument started over something embarrassingly small. Amanda wanted to convert my old workshop in the garage into a home gym. I smiled. I still use that space. Gary chuckled. You don't need all those old tools. Amanda folded her arms. We need the room more than you do. I answered as calmly as I could. I paid for that garage. The room fell silent. Gary rolled his eyes. Amanda crossed her arms tighter. Then came the sentence that changed everything. So what? She snapped. You've lived off us long enough. I actually laughed. Not because it was funny. Because it was impossible. Then she pointed toward the front door. You're nothing but a leech. And my son, the little boy I'd taught to ride a bicycle, the young man whose college tuition I'd helped pay, the groom whose first home I'd made possible, looked at me and quietly said, Dad, my wife and her parents come first. If you can't accept that, leave. I picked up my bag, walked out without another word. As I backed my pickup truck down the driveway, I glanced at the mailbox with our family name still printed across the front. For the first time since Linda died, it didn't feel like home. I pulled onto the road, wiped away a tear, and reached for my phone. There was only one person I needed to call before sunset. My attorney. The first thing my attorney asked after I finished telling him everything was surprisingly simple. Richard, are you calling because you're angry? I sat in my truck outside a quiet park on the north side of Columbus, watching a father teach his little girl how to ride a bicycle. I remember doing that with Ethan. No, I answered after a long silence. I'm calling because I finally stopped lying to myself. There was another pause. Can you come by the office this afternoon? I'll be there. I'd worked with Daniel Mercer only twice before. The first time was after Linda passed away when we updated my will. The second was when I purchased the house Ethan and Amanda lived in. Daniel wasn't flashy. He wasn't the kind of lawyer who filled his office with expensive artwork or talked in complicated legal language. He believed in plain English, and after 38 years fixing furnaces and air conditioners, I appreciated people who explained things without trying to impress anyone. When I walked into his office, he stood, shook my hand, and looked at me carefully. You look exhausted. I feel older than I did yesterday. He motioned for me to sit. Tell me everything from the beginning. So I did. I didn't exaggerate. I didn't leave out my own mistakes. I admitted I should have spoken up years earlier instead of swallowing every insult to keep the family together. When I finished, Daniel opened a thick file cabinet and pulled out a folder. I had a feeling we'd need this someday. He placed several documents on the table between us. The warranty deed, my name, only my name. The mortgage records, every payment had come from my retirement account. The property tax statements, every bill had been paid by me. Homeowner's insurance, again, only my name. Daniel leaned back. Legally speaking, Richard, this has always been your house. I nodded slowly. I know. No one else has ownership. I know. They've been living there because you allowed it. I know. He folded his hands together. Then tell me what you're hoping to accomplish. That question lingered in the room. Finally, I said, I don't want revenge. He raised an eyebrow. I know that's hard to believe after what happened. I believe you. I just can't keep financing people who think I'm a burden. Daniel smiled faintly. That's a very different thing. I stared out the office window. I spent years believing generosity would eventually create gratitude. And now I know generosity without boundaries often creates entitlement. He didn't argue. He simply nodded. Okay, the next hour wasn't emotional. It was practical. Daniel explained exactly what my options were. I could continue paying everything. I could ask them to move out. I could draw up a rental agreement. Or I could sell the property. The decision is entirely yours, he said. I don't want a courtroom battle. You probably won't have one. I don't want to embarrass Ethan. Daniel looked at me carefully. Richard, you're not the one who embarrassed him. Those words settled somewhere deep inside me. For years, I'd carried responsibility for everyone else's choices. Maybe it was finally time to stop. I want to sell. He nodded once. I'll connect you with a realtor I trust. Oh, driving home, or at least toward the small apartment I'd rented for a month, I expected to feel guilty. Instead, I felt strangely calm. Not happy, certainly not proud. Just calm. For the first time in years, I wasn't making a decision based on fear. Fear of upsetting Ethan. Fear of creating conflict. Fear of being called selfish. Those fears had quietly controlled my life longer than I'd realized. Linda used to tell me something whenever I'd work myself to exhaustion helping neighbors. You can't pour from an empty bucket, Rich. I'd always laughed. Now I finally understood. 3 days later, Ethan called. His voice sounded unusually cheerful. Dad, Amanda's parents surprised us with a vacation. That's nice. We're driving down to Hilton Head for the week. I'm glad you'll get some time away. You sure you're okay? I'll be fine. He hesitated. I know things got heated. They did. I'll call when we get back. I'd like that. He hung up. He never asked where I was staying. Never asked whether I needed anything. Never apologized. But somehow I still hoped that vacation might give him time to think. It didn't, because Amanda made sure everyone knew exactly how wonderful life was. Social media did the rest. Daniel had warned me not to spend too much time looking. I ignored him. Every morning there were new pictures. Amanda holding a frozen drink by the beach. Gary grilling seafood. Sheila smiling beneath a giant sun hat. Ethan standing beside them with his arm around his wife. The captions hurt more than the photos. Finally living the life we deserve. Family first. Blessed beyond words. One picture showed them laughing around a waterfront restaurant table. I counted 6 people. Not one empty chair. Not one message asking whether I was all right. For a few minutes, I let myself feel sorry for myself. Then I closed the app. Self-pity wasn't going to solve anything. Meanwhile, my life became unexpectedly busy. Daniel introduced me to a realtor named Melissa Harper. She walked through the property with a notebook and an experienced eye. You've taken remarkable care of this place. I tried. The market's strong. How strong? She smiled. If we prepare it properly, I think you'll be pleasantly surprised. The next morning, professional cleaners arrived. I paid them without hesitation. Not because the house was dirty, because I wanted to leave it in better condition than I'd found it. Old nail holes were patched. The flower beds were trimmed. The gutters cleaned. A loose deck railing I'd been meaning to repair for months was finally fixed. Working alongside a handyman half my age, I found myself smiling for the first time in weeks. Not because I was selling, because I was building something instead of enduring something. Endure. Melissa called 4 days later. We've listed it. Already? How many showings? She laughed. You might want to sit down. I'm sitting. 23 requests in the first 24 hours. I nearly dropped the phone. Seriously. Low inventory, good neighborhood, beautiful maintenance history. Linda would have loved hearing that. She always said taking care of a home eventually paid off. Turns out she was right in more ways than one. By the end of the weekend, Melissa had 8 offers. 3 above asking price. 2 all cash. One young couple wrote a letter. They'd been renting for years. The wife was an elementary school teacher. The husband was a firefighter. They wanted a place where they could raise children. I read their letter 3 times. Then I looked at Linda's wedding ring, which I still wore on a chain around my neck. I think she'd like them, I whispered. I accepted their offer. Not the highest. The best. The tea. Daniel called the following morning. Closing is scheduled for Friday. That quickly. Everyone's motivated. I took a deep breath. Will everything be finished before Ethan comes home? Yes. There it was. The moment where everything became irreversible. I expected panic. Instead, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Peace. Not because I was taking something away from my son. Because I was finally refusing to let someone else define my worth. That afternoon, I drove past the neighborhood one last time. Children rode bicycles along the sidewalks. Neighbors watered their lawns. The maple tree Linda and I had planted years ago swayed gently in the summer breeze. I smiled. Goodbye, old friend. Then I drove away without looking back. Behind me, moving trucks had already been scheduled. By the time Ethan and Amanda returned from their vacation, the house would belong to someone else. The first voicemail came at 2:14 on a Friday afternoon. Hey, Dad. Something really strange is going on. There are moving trucks in the driveway. Call me back. I didn't answer. The second call came 4 minutes later. Then another. Then Amanda. Then Ethan again. By the time I set my phone down beside my coffee cup, there were 12 missed calls. I stared across the small lake behind the extended stay apartment where I'd been living for the past 2 weeks. A pair of ducks drifted lazily across the water, completely unaware that one family was about to discover how quickly life could change. I knew exactly what they were seeing. The closing had happened that morning. The keys had changed hands, legally and finally. The house was no longer mine. Melissa the realtor had called just after noon. It's official, she said warmly. Everything has been recorded. How did the buyers seem? Excited. I'm glad. They're already unloading furniture. I smiled. They'll make it a good home. I think so too. After we hung up, I sat quietly for nearly half an hour. No celebration. No victory. Just silence. People imagine revenge feels exciting. In real life, it mostly feels heavy. Around 3 o'clock, Ethan finally left a voicemail that sounded different. Dad, someone's inside the house. His breathing was uneven. I don't know what's happening. Another pause. They're saying they own it. The line went dead. Later, Daniel filled me in on what happened. The young couple I'd sold the house to had barely finished carrying boxes inside when Ethan's SUV pulled into the driveway. Amanda climbed out first, still wearing sunglasses from the trip, still smiling. She stopped halfway up the walkway. Why are there strangers here? The young wife looked confused. Can I help you? Amanda laughed. I think you're at the wrong address. No, the woman smiled politely. This is our house. Gary climbed out of the SUV next. What kind of joke is this? The firefighter husband walked over carrying a cardboard box. I don't think there's any joke. Ethan stepped between everyone. Look, we've been away for a week. I'm sorry, the new owner answered. We closed this morning. Amanda's smile disappeared. What? The house was sold. No. Yes. No, it wasn't. The husband pointed toward the front door. We have the paperwork. Gary's face turned bright red. This is our property. It isn't anymore. Amanda immediately reached for the front doorknob. It didn't open. The locks had already been changed. Ew! Neighbors began walking outside. Not because they wanted drama, because raised voices always attract attention. Mrs. Henderson from across the street later told Melissa she'd never seen Amanda so angry. She pounded on the front door. This is illegal. The young homeowner opened it only a few inches. Ma'am, please stop hitting the door. My clothes are inside. The woman hesitated. There aren't any clothes. What? The house was vacant when we received possession. That was true. Everything belonging to Ethan and Amanda had been professionally packed and placed in a climate-controlled storage facility I'd rented for 60 days. Nothing had been thrown away. Nothing damaged. I wasn't trying to ruin their lives. I was ending my financial support. There was a difference. Someone called the police. By the time officers arrived, nearly a dozen neighbors were standing outside, pretending not to watch. Officer Ramirez listened patiently while Ethan tried to explain. My father owns this place. The officer nodded. Owned. What? We've already confirmed the property transfer. Amanda interrupted. There has to be some mistake. There isn't. Gary shoved his hands into his pockets. You can't just sell someone's home. Officer Ramirez remained calm. The legal owner can sell his property. But we live here. I understand. This is ridiculous. I appreciate that you're upset. The officer looked directly at Ethan. Sir, according to county records, the property changed ownership this morning. Silence. Real silence. The kind that arrives when denial finally collides with reality. Portento. Amanda turned toward Ethan. You said your dad would never do something like this? He couldn't answer. Because he'd believed that too. I'd spent my entire life rescuing people. Paying bills. Fixing problems. Making sacrifices. Nobody imagined the day would come when I simply stopped. Thus, around 5 that evening, Daniel called. I thought you'd want to know everyone's belongings are safely stored. Thank you. The storage company has already received instructions. They'll have access immediately. I let out a long breath. I don't want them thinking I destroyed anything. I know. You've handled this more generously than many people would. I wasn't sure about that. Maybe I was simply trying to remain the man Linda would have recognized. The missed calls kept coming. 32, 41, 53. Finally, just after sunset, I listened to Ethan's latest voicemail. His voice cracked. Dad, please. Not angry anymore. Just confused. I don't understand. For a long time, neither did I. Then I realized something. He truly didn't know. He had spent years believing the house belonged to his little family. He'd never asked who paid the mortgage. Never checked whose name was on the deed. Never questioned why every repair somehow happened without affecting his own bank account. Convenience has a funny way of becoming invisible. I called him back. He answered before the first ring finished. Dad, neither of us spoke for several seconds. Finally, he asked why. I looked out across the lake. I didn't take your home. What? I sold mine. Another long silence. What? The house was always in my name. I paid every mortgage payment, Ethan. He breathed heavily. I know, but... No, I interrupted gently. I don't think you ever really knew. Dad, where are we supposed to go? The question hurt. Because once upon a time, that would have been the first thing I tried to fix. Instead, I answered honestly. I've already paid for 60 days of climate-controlled storage. What? Your furniture is safe. Our clothes, packed. The kids' things. You don't have children. He laughed bitterly through tears. I can't even think straight. I also paid for the movers. He didn't respond. I wasn't trying to punish you. Then why? Because I finally believed you. What does that mean? When you told me your wife and her parents came first? His breathing caught. I realized I didn't have a place in that house anymore. Dad. So I stopped pretending it was our family home. Amanda grabbed the phone. Richard, I recognized that tone immediately. Not regret. Indignation. How could you humiliate us like this? I didn't humiliate you. You made us homeless. I sold my property after giving you years of free housing. You owe Ethan. I owe my son love, she scoffed. And money. No, you call yourself family. I did. Before she could answer, I quietly ended the call. 3 days later, Daniel met me for lunch. He placed a folder on the table. These came from the bank. Inside were copies of every mortgage payment I'd made over 14 years. 168 monthly payments, each one bearing my account number. I flipped through them slowly, page after page, check after check, sacrifice after sacrifice. Daniel spoke softly. You know what surprises me most? What? You never missed a payment. I smiled sadly. I made a promise. To Ethan. No. Then who? Linda. Years earlier, lying in a hospital bed, she'd squeezed my hand and whispered, take care of our boy. I'd tried. Maybe I'd tried too hard. Because somewhere along the way, taking care of him had turned into protecting him from every consequence. And in doing that, I may have helped create the very entitlement that eventually broke us apart. The first month after the house sold was strangely quiet. No angry phone calls, no surprise visits, no messages from Amanda. Just silence.